Hey there, if you've watched this channel for any amount of time, you'll probably know that I don't get on very well with contemporary German literature. And if you've been here for a little bit longer, you've probably heard me rant about why that is. But if you are a newer watcher, let me catch you up. It is for the most part, not only, but for the most part, because of the style that most, not all, but most German speaking writers use, which is something that I call German literature speak and which I absolutely loathe, despise. I would even go so far as to say I hate it with all my heart. It is a absolutely wooden, pretentious, unnatural style that just permeates everything, even dialogue, and it permeates even the work of German translations, at least translations done by many, many translators who speak German as their first language. Again, not all of them, but most of them. It is pretentious, crappy nonsense, and even just a page of it makes me gag and I can't go on reading the book. And that is why I hardly ever pick up any contemporary German literature. But every so often, a book comes along which, at least partially or to some degree, restores my faith in German authors, German writers. And the newest case of this is Dunkelblum by Austrian author Eva Menasse. This is the story of a small town, a small fictitious town in eastern Austria in the region called Burgenland, which is kind of the easternmost end of Western Europe. And in the center of the novel is a war crime, one that actually happened in a town in this region, an actual historical one. Mm, what happened is that at the end of the Second World War, when the war was lost, they killed or slaughtered, really, the prisoners of a labor camp before the victorious Soviet army came in. And they buried all memory of this crime together with the bodies, never spoke of it again, never perhaps thought of it again. The younger generations, if they knew about it, they certainly didn't learn about it in town and from their parents or grandparents. But as is always the case, the truth will out. And in the course of this story, a skeleton is dug up by coincidence. And now the town's unsavory past is going to come to light bit by bit. And the book deals with how a town like this, or even Austria in general, treated its Nazi past. And it also gives you a portrait of the town and the people that you will find in a town like this. And as such, it is extremely well observed, I think, and merciless in its judgment of the people that you will meet in this town if they aren't deserving of mercy. Of course, there are people who aren't assholes or psychopaths, and those characters are treated with a lot of compassion. So there is a lot of humanity in this book, for better or worse, and a lot of keen observation, and very little to none of this horrible German literature speak that I so despise. So, this good experience that I've had with this book so far put me in the mood to film a recommendation video, this time one of contemporary German literature, because I have filmed a recommendation video for classic German literature before, and I've also filmed one for German nonfiction, but I haven't filmed one for contemporary fiction yet. The usual disclaimer when I speak about German literature, I'm talking about German language literature. So that's why you will find authors from Austria in this video. Eva Menasse isn't the only Austrian author, in fact. Second disclaimer, I'm only going to talk about books for adults. And the third disclaimer, I'm only going to go back as far as, or I draw the line at what we call German post-war literature. So only books that are newer than post-war literature were eligible for this video. My first official recommendation is similar in many aspects to Eva Menasse's Dunkelblum, which I just talked about. It is Vor dem Fest, or Before the Feast in English, by Sasa Stanisic, and this has been translated into English, as have all the books that I recommend in this video, if I'm not mistaken. This one is also set in a small town, this time in Eastern Germany, and it tells you the whole history of the town and gives you a sweeping portrait of all the characters in this town. But the story takes place in the course of only one single night, a night in which the whole history of the town is comprised symbolically, sort of. And book is just marvelous in the way that it paints such a vivid cultural picture in a way that is so entertaining, so humorous, and really brutal in the way that certain unsavory characters or unsavory aspects of the town are portrayed. However, at the same time, it never crosses the border into disrespect or snobbishness. And that makes it an absolute joy to read. I'll give you one caveat, however, and that is that I think that if you are not familiar with the history, with German history, the history of the region, and kind of the cultural history of the region, you might not be able to fully appreciate this book. I've read some very negative reviews from English speakers on Goodreads who call it boring and like it missed the mark and it doesn't really know what it wants to do. And these people clearly don't self-reflect enough to be able to recognize that they are just lacking the context. It is them who are lacking and not the book. But to prevent situations like this, I'm going to give you this caveat that you should only pick up this book if you are at least somewhat familiar with what it is actually talking about. Going backwards chronologically in terms of publication year, I'll give you a book that I have talked about several times on this channel. I've recommended it to many people. I've even made a short recommendation video just dedicated to this book, but I think it still can do with a little bit of advertisement, a little bit of cheering. It is Schlafes Bruder by Robert Schneider, called Brother of Sleep in English. This is the life story of a man called Elias Alder, who was gifted from birth with the rare gift of being able to hear the music of the universe in everything, or the divine music, if you like, or the music of the spheres. He can hear it in everything that he puts his ear to. But luck would have it, or fate would have it, that Elias is born into a tiny backwards alpine village in the 19th century, where life is extremely hard and impractical nonsense isn't tolerated, and any kind of difference in people isn't tolerated either. People certainly don't have time to make music. The only context in which music is tolerated is the church and prayer and devotion. And so Elias at least gets the chance to channel the music of the universe that he hears into making organ music. But as you can imagine, the music that comes out of him isn't quite the music that people are used to in his village. This is an amazingly inventive and creative story, but it is told in a very sparse language that can at times be as brutal as the setting that it describes and kind of the mood of the setting that it describes. It has also been made into an extremely beautiful movie, which I actually watched before I read this book, which actually made me aware of that the book existed. And the movie will give you a real appreciation for organ music if you didn't already have one. My next recommendation is a famous modern classic. It's Kassandra by Christa. This is, of course, the story of the Trojan women who are taken as spoils of war, of the Trojan War, back to the Greek kingdoms, told by Cassandra, who is taken by Agamemnon to Mycenae. And as such, it is, of course, the sadly timeless story of the treatment of women in war, but also beyond war. But while the story transcends its ancient setting and the ancient mythology, the best thing about this book is that it was written in a time before everybody and their cat was writing retellings of Greek mythology, whether or not they were actually extremely knowledgeable about the topic and the literature that exists about these stories. At times, I have to say, it can become a little bit too much. It is almost Christa Wolf's downfall that she is so knowledgeable about the topic and about the ancient literature that she uses. It gets a bit much and it verges on the pretentious, but just before the background of all the new modern trash that is being put out by publishers almost daily, it seems, I think this deserves a spot among my German contemporary recommendations. My next recommendation is Ein fliehendes Pferd by Martin Walser, called Runaway Horse in English. And this one comes with a big caveat as well, which is that I think you should only read this book if you are at least in your 30s. Just because I think that if you are younger, you might not be able to appreciate or even recognize or understand the latent world weariness in this book and the loathing that the main character feels. The story takes place in a small seaside town where the main couple, a middle aged married couple, have gone on a holiday, and there they have the misfortune to meet an old classmate of the husband's together with his wife. And although it is immediately obvious, at least to our first couple, that the four of them are completely incompatible, they still start spending time together and spend more and more time together, and things kind of escalate. It is not a psychological thriller, however, so don't go into it expecting a psychological thriller. It's really rather a quiet book, I would say. There is a lot of quiet, silent suffering in this book. With my final recommendation, we are almost into post-war literature territory, but the story is so relevant today, maybe more relevant today than ever, that I think it deserves a place in this contemporary recommendation video. It is Die verlorene Ehre der Katharina Blum by Heinrich Böll. In English, The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum. This is the story of a young woman, a very ordinary young woman who is just out about town during the carnival days in Cologne, and she hooks up with a young man who, unbeknownst to her, is wanted for murderer, is an escaped murderer who is hunted by the police and has just disappeared in the crowd that is Cologne during the carnival days. When the press then gets wind of the story of this hookup, they set out to absolutely destroy this young woman, Katharina, and, well, her honor, her public image. And of course, it is not just the press, or the press wouldn't be such a big problem if everybody else wasn't taking part in this destruction of this young woman and her image as well. Strangers, as well as people that she knows, people that she works with, just everybody. This is exactly what is happening almost on a daily basis still today, more than ever, with the internet and social media and the reactive mindset that everybody seems to be in. And there's a new witch hunt, just in the fashion of the witch hunt of Katharina Blum, almost every day now, or so it seems. And therefore, this book is more relevant than ever today, I think. And I wish it were read more in schools. I wish teachers were reading this book with their students in the context of social media and internet literacy and all these good things. So these are all the recommendations I have for today. I would actually be able to recommend a couple more books, but they are books that haven't been translated into English. One of them actually hasn't been translated at all that I can see. And I thought that today, at least for this first recommendation video of contemporary German literature, I'd stick to books that have been translated into English. Remember, I can't stand contemporary German literature, generally speaking. So these are very, very high recommendations indeed. It's a huge, big compliment for German literature to be recommended by me, if I say so myself. I will see you again very soon, and then perhaps with my German literature TBR. So, even more potential German recommendations. What is going on with me these days? Anyhow, that's it. That's all. Bye.